Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Wednesday. It's hard to believe it's already Wednesday. These weeks just fly by. So yeah, it's Wednesday morning at about 9:30. So hope everyone's doing good. There's often like the thoughts on my mind. What movie do I want to see in the theater next? And I honestly I don't know. Like there isn't anything I could think of offhand. The one movie I'm kind of interested in seeing, but I'm probably going to pass just because I'm like, well, I don't know. It's just I'm not a fan of 90s slasher films. I probably will see it anyway. I've actually heard it was actually really good, but the way it's been described, it's not really, I don't know, it's not really my wheelhouse. It's not really my jam. But there's a new slasher movie called Heart Eyes, and I've heard it's good. But again, I'm not really into the kind of the glossy slasher films that came out in the 90s. I like stuff that's kind of, I like the grimy, dirtier slasher films. And, it's, I don't know, like I do want to see it though. And I have not seen it, obviously. And I did a little show where I talked about the trailer that I saw and things I heard about it. But anyway, the last modern slasher film, which I thought was super awesome, I've done a couple of shows on it, was In a Violent Nature. I saw that on DVD when it came out, and then I liked it enough to where I ended up getting it, buying it, or actually, no, I got it from Santa Claus for Christmas. I ended up getting In a Violent Nature on Blu-ray, so I did a second show on that movie. I've watched that movie about 3 or 4 times now. I love that movie, and that's a slasher movie, through and through, 100%. And it's brand new, came out last year, but it's got this, it's got those qualities that I love. And the thing that's so cool about that movie is it's original. It's an original. The story, everything is pretty straightforward, and it more or less is something we've seen a lot or 1,000 times before. But it has a unique. It tells the story from like a really unique angle, which I think it's great for any kind of genre film to come along where it like takes some of the tropes, but then pushes it forward. And I think that movie does that fully. So anyway, today's show is on a movie I talked about. I saw it probably a couple of months ago. It came out on DVD, and I had traditionally, like for this channel, I don't usually do big kind of end of the year shows where I talk about the best my top 10 or my top 20 movies of that particular year. But for 2024, I did that, and that was I don't know, it might have been one of the first times, if it possibly might have been the first time I've ever done that for this channel. And the reason I decided to do that was I thought 2024 was just an extraordinary year for horror films. A lot of variety and a lot of creativity, a lot of creative films, and I think all of the movies that I talked about, Long Legs and In a Violent Nature, Substance, especially Substance, Late Night with the Devil, just a lot of great films that I felt really stood out on kind of in their own terms, as well as kind of pushing the genre of horror that we all know and love, pushing it, a few steps further, and in a very modern kind of contemporary way. And I think every genre kind of needs that after a while, especially say the slasher genre or the horror genre, where it's been it's been around for decades. So when I did the list, and I decided to do a little list of the best of 2024. I didn't really put in, I didn't put the movies in a very particular order, but I would say that the two movies that really were closely tied for, say, number one was Demi Moore in The Substance, which is an extraordinary film. Demi Moore also won for Best Actress, which was astounding because that movie is. If you haven't seen The Substance yet, I highly recommend it because that movie is fucking bonkers. And then also Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, which I thought was just a masterpiece. And those two movies were kind of almost tied for first place for me in a way. But then the thing that was crazy was after I did the list, I saw this movie that I had seen in the. I typically rent all my movies, all my new releases at Opera House Video. I'm actually going to go there today to get some new movies. So stay tuned for the next couple days, or tomorrow I'll do a show or shows on those movies. But I went to Opera House Video and I had seen this movie, and this movie's called Oddity. And it came out in 2024. I had seen it for it's been out for quite a while on DVD. And it was one of those movies I kept seeing on the shelf at Opera House Video. And I thought it looked kind of intriguing, kind of cool. But then I was like, I don't know. I kind of always passed on it for whatever reason. And I always got something else. And then I saw a review for Oddity, and there was a guy that I like, who's a really good YouTube guy who covers all kinds of horror films, and he had said that Oddity was his favorite film of 2024, and he really raved about it. And I didn't know anything about this movie. I didn't see any trailers. Totally cold, and the way he described this film and kind of the setup, I was like, yep, this sounds awesome. So the next day, I went out and I rented Oddity, and I was blown away by it. I thought this movie is just fucking badass. So then the next day after I finally rented it and I watched it, I did a show on it. And it was so good that I was like, wow, I wish I saw this movie earlier. And this film would have definitely been in that list of my best films of 2024, best horror films. Because it's an extraordinary movie. And it's one of those movies I just kept thinking about. And I went to Bull Moose about 3 weeks ago or so. And the movie that I was seeking out, because again, I had only seen it on DVD, the movie that I was really wanting to buy and to see on Blu-ray was Oddity. So I picked up this bad boy on one of my last trips, or I should say my last trip to Bull Moose. And I picked up Oddity on Blu-ray because I never seen it before on Blu-ray. Obviously, I'd only seen it once on DVD, so I was like, yes, and it was there. It was funny. I just started to look in the aisles, and it was right there, and I was just like, oh shit, and it was really cheap, and so I was super excited, and then I kind of got busy, and I got, I don't know, distracted by a couple of things, and I'm like, why the hell? And like a couple of weeks went by, and I'm like, why the hell didn't I watch this? So then last night I sat down and actually watched this, and I absolutely love this movie. I enjoyed it even more for the obvious reasons that the quality of this on Blu-ray is extraordinary. It felt, again, like I've described a million times before, but it felt like I was watching it for the first time. Really beautiful cinematography. The transfer of this on Blu-ray is just killer. Amazing sound design. Creepy as hell, and legitimately, this film legitimately has scary moments. Overall, this film feels like it was made in the 70s, which is my favorite decade. It has this really old school flavor. It's um it's kind of like a modern day classic ghost story. But I will say too that saying that or kind of describing the movie that way is maybe limiting this film a little bit, because I think this movie has other elements. It's got a little bit of a gothic vibe to it, and again, at the core, I think it's like just a really high end, incredibly crafted, incredibly well crafted ghost story. But it has elements of really great suspense too. It has, and it's, and I think this film is like it has elements of like a classic thriller as well, and it's got this real slow burned pace for it that really works. There is just the atmosphere for this movie is kind of extraordinary, which again for me is those all of those elements of which I described were why I think so many fantastic horror movies that came out in the 70s, why I feel like directors in the 70s were all about that when they made horror films. Even the low budget exploitation movies, but then also the bigger, maybe the more bigger budgeted horror films that came out. I think directors in the 70s were true storytellers, and this has that feel to it, and it is gritty. It's got a lot of interesting plot twists and turns. There is like this reveal of one of the main characters where there's this kind of conspiracy of murder going on, which is super awesome. The and the settings for this film also harkens back to that classic ghost story. It's basically set in this old, extremely creepy house. But it's just got so much atmosphere, and the cast is fantastic. The other thing that in the past I have complained about the quality of their films, but this is a Shudder production. Shudder is a big streaming company platform, and they stream a lot of different kinds of horror films. And about 4 or 5 years ago, like most of these streaming services, they started venturing into doing their own films, their own production companies. You have Netflix was the one company that started it, and then you had Hulu and all of these other streaming platforms where they were you know showing movies, but then they were very successful, so they started doing their own original productions. I mean, one of the bigger ones was Hulu was responsible for the Hellraiser remake, and then also the Predator film that came out a couple of years ago, Prey, which is another just amazing film. So there was a series of a lot of these companies that were doing it, but then there are also a lot of these original productions that were not very good. And I felt like Shudder has put out a lot of films that they have produced and financed that I didn't think were very good, and I had seen a few of them in the last few years, and I was like, oh, you know, I wasn't a fan. I just thought like, yeah, the production value for some of their original work was good, but it just seemed like the stories were, I don't know, kind of generic and really predictable. But this is a Shutter production, and this is a fucking home run for them. The other film that they did, which I was really blown away, is In a Violent Nature. That was another Shutter original, and I could be wrong, but I think they were also involved with Longlegs. I might be wrong, but they've done a few movies now, and I'm like, wow. Not only are they doing great films, but they've done some of the best movies that have come out in 2024. So I was like, holy shit, okay, now I'm going to really pay attention to what Shudder is going to get behind. Because this movie is just amazing, and I think it's easily one of the best horror films of last year, and it could be argued that this is the best horror film that came out in 2024. It's legitimately scary, like actually scary, and it's super creepy, and it's just really original. It really is. It's got such great atmosphere and such great tension. Um, it was directed by um, Damian McCarthy, who I had never heard of before. The cast is extraordinary in this movie as well. Carolyn Bracken, Caroline Menton, Tadhag Murphy, Gwelyn Lee, Stephen Wall, Jonathan French. The script for this, the story itself, the script, the storyline is so well written. It's such a tight story. Great, great, um, great narrative. Very original. But the cast, these are all actors and actresses I'd never seen before. I guess for the most part, you could say, a relatively unknown cast. But man, the chemistry is just so awesome on screen, and it's from the opening scene to this film to the conclusion to this film, which is the ending for this movie is so such a payoff and is so satisfying and it's just great. It's perfect. Top to bottom, beautifully shot, incredibly well directed. I love the pacing for this movie. I think it really allows the viewer to kind of really dig your heels into the movie because there is there is a lot left to your imagination. It does have this element which I really love about horror films is and just generally with art or films in particular, the whole kind of or music as well. The kind of the whole like less is more, where the viewer can really sink your teeth into what's being established, but you're not being shown everything all at once. You're getting these little snippets. It can be at a really slow pace, but you're getting these little snippets of information that you find intriguing and that over time it's just pulling you in further and further and further to where you just really resonate. All the characters resonate with you, and you love everyone on the screen, and you have empathy towards all of the characters, even the villains in this movie. And the villains in this movie are just really awesome. So, and it has some really unique twists and turns in the story. It's not really predictable. It's got some really cool surprises, which I thought were great. There's even elements of where you feel like, but it's done really well. Like if you think that this is real or not, and or if it's just this like fantastical story, but it's just great. And it harkens back to those classic films. I think one of the best movies that does that. You know, Ridley Scott's Alien. It's got that slow burn. Where you don't necessarily have to have jump scares and copious amounts of gore in every frame, and you can let the story unfold. But you're as a viewer, it activates your brain to kind of think about what information you're taking in, and it leaves a lot of breathing room, and there's a lot of space in this movie, which I think is super crucial to creating that creepy atmosphere that gets under your skin, and it feels real. Everything feels real. It's got this organic, this heavy organic vibe to it, and this an Oddity absolutely has that. I mean, it's just you can kind of taste the atmosphere in this movie, and I can't recommend this movie enough. And like I had said before, when I first saw this movie last year, now I this if I had seen it at the right time, this would have easily been in that video of my top movies of 2024, and it might have even been number one, because now I think, as far as movies that are now tied for first place from last year, I definitely say The Substance, Nosferatu, and The Oddity. And just thinking of those titles and saying them out loud, those three movies they're all horror films, but they are all so polar opposite of each other, so different in every way. And it to me it exemplifies the year that was 2024, because of just the sheer creativity, the originality, and the diversity. Horror is the best the best genre that there is, and I think it really takes films like this to really keep it to keep the genre that we all know and love, to keep it alive and thriving and doing new things, creative things, and pushing it forward. And this movie is a absolute prime time example of it. I can't recommend this movie enough if you have not seen this movie. So, yeah, Oddity. Check this out. I highly recommend. It's probably online to watch, but I highly recommend seeing it on Blu-ray. It's available everywhere now. It's worth the purchase. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.